Welcome to Tea and Shadow Stories, where the darkness holds inexplicable secrets. Tonight, I won't just tell you a ghost story. I'm taking you on a real hunt, a journey where the line between reality and nightmare blurs at the Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. Imagine this amidst the bone-chilling cold of a 2024 winter night. Three brave investigators dared to open Waverly's rusted doors. Every brick, every cold slab here is soaked with the pain, despair, and silent deaths of thousands. They weren't seeking rumors. They went to confront what existed and what was still waiting. Have you ever wondered what truly lurks in a place where death reigns? What happens when you don't just hear whispers, but feel the icy breath of an entity not of this world tonight? I won't just recount events. I'll take you along through every chilling step, through every moment where ultimate terror will engulf you. Did they make it out alive? Or did something truly follow them out of Waverly Hills? Prepare yourselves, because after tonight, the darkness won't look the same. The ghost of Waverly Hospital. In the extreme cold of a Louisville, Kentucky winter in 2024, the city carried a quaint, charming beauty, yet was always permeated by vague whispers, hushed tales of a slumbering past. However, no whisper was darker, more haunting, or more persistent than the legends that clung like poisonous ivy to the cracked brick walls of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. It stood isolated on a hill surrounded by bare oak trees, just beyond the city limits. A colossal tomb, a ruined cathedral of forgotten souls. Every brick, every cold concrete slab was soaked with the pain, despair, and silent deaths of thousands who had once been confined within its gloomy corridors. On a biting cold January night, when the outdoor temperature had dropped to near freezing, three paranormal investigators bravely stepped through the decaying threshold of Waverly, seeking what many locals didn't even dare to name. They were a unique team, each carrying their own reason for confronting the darkness, but all drawn by the deadly allure of Waverly Hills. Jason Maris, at 45, was a legendary name in the paranormal investigation community. For the past 23 years, he had dedicated his life to chasing shadows, the faint traces of the otherworld. His salt and pepper hair, worn leather jacket slung over broad shoulders, and deep and intense eyes commanded attention whenever he spoke. Jason was not a sensationalist seeking fame. He was a scientist of the strange, a man who always sought logic in chaos, structure in darkness. He had traveled the country from haunted hospitals in the Outer Banks, North Carolina, to rusty old prisons in Huntsville, Texas, countless moss-covered cemeteries, and decaying colonial mansions in New England. But something about Waverly Hills always pulled him back, like a ship drawn to a fatal beacon. It wasn't just its dark history, the thousands of tuberculosis patients who died there, but an underlying hunger, an unseen entity craving energy, craving recognition, to be seen, lurking within the crumbling walls. Standing beside the team's black SUV, its faint headlights casting eerie shadows on the building, Jason took a deep breath. His breath immediately turned to white mist in the cold air, dissipating almost instantly. His steel-gray eyes were fixed on the terrifying silhouette of Waverly, a decaying Gothic revival structure standing defiant against the moonless night sky. The familiar feeling of unsettling silence began to envelop them, a silence not born of emptiness, but of the suppressed voices of countless souls. Behind him, Daryl Lang, the quiet giant of the group, adjusted the heavy equipment bag on his shoulder. Daryl, nearly 50, was built like a double-door refrigerator, with a shiny bald head and a thick, graying beard. He was a master technician, a man of technology, preferring to work with infrared cameras, digital recorders, and EMF meters rather than dealing with people. By nature reserved, he rarely spoke. Only when something was truly important would his words resonate, slow and steady. His face often bore a stoic expression, but occasionally a slight furrow of his brow or a nod would reveal his agreement or warning. Tonight, the tension was evident in Daryl's shoulders. a sign that he too felt the weight of Waverly. Beside Daryl was Abby Chen, a woman with an innate psychic ability she never asked for. In her 20s, Abby was petite, her pale skin contrasting sharply with her neatly tied black hair. Her eyes, large and deep, often gazed distantly, as if she were listening to an invisible symphony only she could hear. Abby could hear the voices of the dead forgotten whispers, desperate cries trapped between worlds, and sometimes they would answer her. It was a burden, a curse, and also a blessing. She had learned to control it, but in places like Waverly, her ability was like an open gate, leaving her more vulnerable than ever. Tonight, her hands clutched the strap of her small backpack, her knuckles white with tension. Though she tried to maintain composure, a slight tremor ran down her spine, betraying the anxiety she couldn't hide. The clock on Jason's phone read 12:05 a.m. as they locked the car. The parking lot was empty, only the sound of wind whistling through the cracks of the massive building ahead, like an unending mournful dirge. They entered Waverly through a rusted steel back door, hidden in shadow. Just after midnight, the moment the heavy door creaked open, the air inside immediately shifted. It wasn't just the cold of winter seeping in. It was a deeper, damper cold, as if they had just stepped into a chilling stone tomb. The temperature dropped by about 10 degrees within their first 5 steps, a sudden and unusual change that made all three hold their breath. No one spoke a word, only the sound of broken glass and concrete fragments crunching under their heavy boots, echoing eerily in the oppressive silence. The smell of damp mold, dust, and something else indescribable, like the scent of decay and despair, assailed their nostrils, making Jason unconsciously frown. The interior was an entirely different world. Their flashlight beams danced across the filthy, graffiti-covered, and cracked walls, revealing the remnants of a painful past. The main hall, once a welcoming place for hopeful patients, was now a scene of utter ruin. The ceiling had collapsed in many places, exposing rusty pipes like dead arteries. Old, rusted stretchers lay motionless on the cold floor, like abandoned hospital beds awaiting their long-departed occupants. Wheelchair frames cast long, distorted shadows under the flashlight beams, conjuring images of frail patients once pushed along in them, towards an inevitable fate. Jason glanced at his watch, its faint green digital light flickering in the darkness, displaying 12:17 a.m. "To the 5th floor," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, decaying space. He didn't need to explain why. All three knew. Abby shivered slightly, an involuntary physical reaction to the wave of psychic energy that washed over her. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, but she didn't object. Their destination, as always, was room 502, a place so infamous that even those who had never set foot in Waverly knew of it. It was rumored to be where a nurse named Mary, pregnant and unmarried, had hanged herself in the 1920s. Some believe she was murdered, the truth buried by those wanting to cover up a scandal. Whatever the truth, her presence, or something connected to her tragedy, remained. Jason had been here before, had experienced inexplicable things in that room. He had seen something. But tonight, the feeling was heavier. It wasn't just the gloom of history, it was a presence waiting, a tense silence he had never felt before. It was like a predator holding its breath, waiting for its prey to fall into a trap. They began to ascend the spiral iron staircase, each metallic step producing a chilling echo in the dark. Cold space. Their flashlight beams flickered with each step, casting dancing shadows on the walls and ceiling, transforming mundane shapes into distorted monsters. Each floor they passed through had its own atmosphere, but the 5th floor was unique. When they reached the 5th floor, a long, dimly lit corridor stretched out in both directions, like a tunnel with no escape. The concrete floor was cold, dull gray, sparsely littered with the remnants of a painful past, rusted iron bed frames, overturned, cracked floor tiles, and a strong, damp, musty odor hanging in the air like a thick fog. At both ends of the corridor were doors leading to the rooftop, once a playground for children with tuberculosis. Tiny souls who found a little sunshine before being swallowed by darkness. As they moved down the corridor, the air grew heavier. There was a faint, metallic groan somewhere, perhaps caused by wind through a broken window. But to Jason, it sounded like a sigh from deep within the building. They stopped in front of room 504, directly below room 502. It was a simple patient room, now just an empty and decaying space, but it was close to the epicenter of the energy they were seeking. Jason raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. "Quiet," he whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the deathly silence. "Listen." At first, there was only the sound of wind whistling through broken windows, creating eerie, mournful sounds. The wind sounded like someone crying, endlessly. Then, each sasher, there was a thin tap, 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 a faint sound, yet distinct, footsteps, precise, steady, like heels tapping on hard stone. It wasn't their footsteps, nor Daryl fumbling with his equipment. "Is someone walking?" Abby whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. She tightened her grip on her backpack strap, eyes wide, staring into the darkness. She felt the presence, a chill running down her spine, but couldn't pinpoint its origin. Jason shook his head slowly, his face tense in the faint light of his flashlight. "Everyone's here," he said, implying that no one else from their team was nearby. A quick glance at Daryl's face showed intense concentration. He was listening, his head tilted slightly toward the sound. They listened again. The footsteps continued circling, seemingly about 20 feet from them, behind the left wall of the corridor. The sound had an eerie regularity, like an unending rhythm. It wasn't like someone walking normally. It had a different quality, a stalking, probing feel. Jason signaled Daryl. The quiet giant adjusted his infrared camera lens, slowly sweeping it in the direction of the sound. The camera screen remained a faint green, with no thermal images detected. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the footsteps didn't stop. Instead, they began to circle, as if something was pacing in an invisible circle. This feeling, the presence of something invisible yet producing physical sound, began to gnaw at Jason's composure. Jason felt something unusual. The corner of his eye was constantly drawn to the right, towards the rooftop access door. That door had been wide open before a gust of cold. Damp air flowed into the corridor, carrying the smell of rusted metal and the chill of the winter night. He turned his head, checked, but saw only darkness and empty window frames. The feeling persisted. It was like an unyielding gaze from a place no one could see. Finally, unable to resist the urge, Jason turned his head fully toward the rooftop access door, and he saw it. At first, just a movement, a shifting of shadow in the cold air near the doorframe. It wasn't a shadow, not an illusion of light. It was a shifting of darkness itself, as if a piece of night had detached itself from the surrounding space. Then it began to take shape, not walking, not crouching, but crawling. On the ceiling, Jason gasped. A dry choke sound caught in his throat. It was something darker than darkness, like an emptiness given form, yet with enough depth for his eyes to discern its vague outlines. It moved unnaturally, its abnormally long limbs bending at inhuman angles, impossible for the joints of any creature he had ever known. Its head tilted slightly, a slow, chilling movement, as if it was sensing Jason's gaze fixed upon it. He said nothing. He couldn't. His entire body froze, as if caught in the grip of terror. The thing he had been chasing for 23 years, the thing whose existence he had often doubted, was now manifesting right before his eyes, a horrifying entity defying all laws of physics. The thing placed a hand, if it was a hand, across the rooftop access doorframe and pulled itself into the corridor. Jason's flashlight, held in his trembling hand, flickered wildly, its weak light strobing on the horrifying shape. The shadow turned, a sudden movement, as if startled at being caught, then vanished into the ceiling like ink spreading in water, leaving no trace but a sudden, icy gust of air. Jason stood stunned, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His mind reeled, attempting to find a logical explanation, an illusion, a misunderstanding. But there was none. The image was seared into his retina, undeniable proof. Daryl, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere, immediately swept his infrared camera towards where Jason was staring. The screen remained blank. Nothing. Daryl frowned, his face showing clear bewilderment. He trusted Jason, but his equipment registered nothing. Abby looked at Jason, her face pale, her lips trembling. She didn't see it directly, but she felt an icy surge of energy, a malevolent presence she had never encountered. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with fear. Her large eyes were filled with horror and a deep, profound dread. Jason nodded slowly, his throat still dry. "It saw us," he said softly, his words a faint, lost whisper in the vast space of the corridor. He felt a shiver run down his spine, not from Waverly's cold, but from the feeling of being hunted. They didn't linger. Though Jason wanted to analyze, to record, his survival instinct told him to act. "Into room 504, he said, his voice deeper than usual. "Quickly." When they entered room 504, it felt as if they had stepped into a vacuum. Sound vanished, the wind whistling through the broken windows, the groaning of the building, all dissipated. Even their own breaths seemed swallowed by this deathly silence. The room, already dilapidated, now became unusually cold, a coldness not from low temperature, but from the absence of life. Abby began to sense, her small hands outstretched, fingers lightly tracing the peeling walls, feeling the invisible vibrations that others couldn't. Her face was tense, eyes closed in deep concentration. Her skin was covered in goosebumps, a clear sign she was connecting with something. "There's pain here," she whispered, her voice faint, lost in the room's silence. "Something lost, trapped. It doesn't understand it's dead." Tears began to stream down Abby's face, not tears of weakness, but of profound empathy for the pain she was sensing. She was a mirror reflecting the emotions of the other side, and this pain was overwhelming for her. Suddenly, her body jerked violently. She gasped, as if punched in the stomach. Her whole body trembled uncontrollably, eyes wide open, staring into the void in front of her. "Jason, not suicide. Someone held her down." Her voice trembled, filled with horror. She didn't just see, but felt the utter terror of the murdered nurse. Jason stepped forward, his face serious. "You mean she was murdered?" Abby nodded frantically, her hands clenched into fists. "She was dragged in here. They staged it like a suicide." She took a step back, as if trying to escape the horrific image unfolding in her mind. She was so scared. Her fear. "It's still here," she pleaded. Just then, the EMF meter in Jason's pocket spiked. From a steady green, its indicator light turned bright red, staying there, as if absorbing a massive amount of energy. The device's beeping began to quicken, a clear warning signal. This was a significant level of paranormal activity, far beyond what they usually encountered. A deafening crash reverberated, shaking the entire room. The door to room 504 slammed shut, not just closing but with such force that the entire wall shook. Abby let out a terrified scream, a piercing sound that echoed in the deathly silence. She recoiled, bumping into Daryl, who was also stunned. Jason lunged at the door, trying to open it. The doorknob was ice cold beneath his palm. He yanked, using all his strength, but the door didn't budge. It was as if held shut by an invisible force, a lock that did not belong to the physical world. Daryl's camera screen, which was recording, immediately flickered with static, black and white streaks dancing wildly, distorting the image of Jason struggling with the door. And then a voice, a whisper. It was a woman's voice. Why? Did you, does it come?" The voice was not from Abby, nor Daryl. It emanated from within the room, seemingly from the thin air itself. It was faint, fragile, yet with a chilling quality, as if uttered from a breathless throat, a soul trapped in profound agony. It was a sound that belonged to nothing living. It carried anger, confusion, and unspeakable pain. Jason stood frozen, his arm still clutching the doorknob, his eyes wide, searching for the source of the sound. Abby, trembling, looked towards the farthest corner of the room. Her eyes were fixed on a point in the darkness where there was nothing but bare walls. "Something's there," she said, her voice so shaky it was almost inaudible. "Not the nurse, something else." Her words sent a chill down Jason's spine. Was there a second entity in this room? One even more terrifying than Nurse Mary's trapped spirit? Jason shone his flashlight towards that corner. The flashlight beam flickered erratically, as if affected by an invisible energy field. In a brief moment they saw it. The shadow, upside down, crawling on the ceiling. It wasn't a reflection or an illusion. It was a solid black entity, clinging to the ceiling, its abnormally long limbs bending at bizarre angles, like broken, tangled wires. Its head tilted unnaturally, its neck seemingly bent at an impossible angle, and its indistinct eyes, or where its eyes should have been, stared down at them. Its face, it was empty, featureless, just a deep black void. But it still watched them, a gaze devoid of emotion, only hunger. Jason felt his gut clench. This was not a traditional ghost. This was something else, something more malevolent, more primal. The cold of Waverly suddenly felt scorching, as if they were being burned by a primal fear. "We're getting out of here." Jason pulled Abby back, his voice urgent. Now, he was no longer thinking of recording evidence. His survival instinct had kicked in. Daryl, as if by reflex, slammed his shoulder against the door. A loud crack of decaying wood echoed, and the door burst open. He wasn't easily scared, but what he had just witnessed, even for a fleeting moment, had sent shivers down his spine. He didn't need to see it clearly to know it wasn't something from this world. They burst out, but the corridor was different. It was longer, seemingly windowless. The light from outside, which they thought they had seen in the distance, faded, swallowed by a thick, dark mist. They ran, their footsteps pounding on the cold concrete, their gasping breaths echoing in the distorted space. The room shifted. The corridors repeated. The building no longer obeyed the laws of space. Every turn seemed to lead them back to where they started, an endless loop of despair. And always the sound of something crawling on the ceiling, the scraping, the light dragging, a constant, horrifying auditory reminder. It was a ceaseless warning that they were not alone, and the thing they had seen was right above them, watching their every move. Their fear escalated exponentially. From initial curiosity to ultimate terror, they reached the stairs, gasping for breath. Down, fast, step by step. Third floor, second floor. Hope sparked within them, hope of escaping this nightmarish labyrinth. Then, es surden down. A voice. You shouldn't have come here." The voice this time was clearer, closer. No longer a faint whisper, but a chilling resonance, as if it was speaking right next to their ears. The shadow reappeared, ahead, crawling on the ceiling towards them. Fast. This time, it didn't disappear. It moved with terrifying speed, its long, spindly limbs bending and extending grotesquely, like a giant spider. Its featureless head still tilted, its empty eyes seemingly locked on Jason. Jason turned and ran. Without hesitation, no time to think, only survival instinct. He didn't look back, just knew the thing was approaching. The main door, they burst out at 4:06 a.m., all three panting, lungs burning from the cold air, muscles aching from the tension. The air outside Waverly Hills was still freezing, but it felt like a warm embrace compared to the chilling cold inside. Sparse streetlights on the dark, winding road cast long, distorted shadows of trees. Silence enveloped the area outside the building. But it was not peace. It was the calm after the storm, a heavy, waiting silence. Jason turned back, his breath still ragged. His eyes involuntarily looked towards the Waverly building, a massive, dark structure rising against the night sky. And he saw it. In the broken window of room 502, a figure stood there, not crawling, but standing. A tall, slender black shadow with the vague outline of a woman, yet carrying a terrifying emptiness. It stood motionless, looking down at them from that height, a gaze beyond description. No expression, no emotion, just the presence of a cold void. He pulled his audio recorder from his pocket. His hand trembled as he pressed play. First, static, the hiss of disturbed electromagnetic particles. Then, Dingham, you saw me. The voice was not Nurse Mary's. It was not a faint whisper. It was a different voice, deeper, older, carrying an unmistakable threat. It was the voice of the thing they had seen on the ceiling, the voice of the shadow standing in room 502. The story they recorded that night was not just another episode in their careers. It was a warning Jason, Daryl, and Abby would never forget. Some shadows are not echoes of the past. They are waiting to be seen, and once you see them, they see you too. The chilling voice, "You saw me," resonated in Jason's ears long after they stumbled out of Waverly Hills. It wasn't just a recording, it was an imprint, a psychic burn seared into his very being. The freezing air outside the sanatorium, though biting, offered no comfort. It felt like a flimsy veil, barely separating them from the suffocating horror they had just escaped. Streetlights on Waverly Road cast long, gaunt shadows of bare trees, dancing in the wind like macabre puppets. The silence wasn't peace. It was the heavy, waiting calm after a scream, anticipating the next. Jason, still gasping for breath, found his eyes drawn back to the massive structure. In the broken window of room 502, the vague silhouette of the shadowy entity still stood, watching. It was a tall, slender black shape, undeniably feminine in outline, yet utterly devoid of human warmth. Its posture was unsettlingly still, a sentinel of pure, condensed emptiness. No expression, no discernible features, just a gaping void where a face should be. It didn't move, but its presence was a palpable weight, pressing down on them. Even from that distance, Daryl, usually composed, was visibly shaken. His large frame, typically a bastion of calm, now trembled faintly. He ran a hand over his bald head, his brow deeply furrowed. He hadn't seen the entity as clearly as Jason, but the slamming door, the voices, and Abby's terror had been more than enough. He knew, instinctively, that this was different. This wasn't just a residual haunting or a conscious spirit. This was something deeper, something other. His firm belief in technology as a means to understand the paranormal was now fractured. His cameras were useless. His EMF meter had screamed red, but it couldn't capture the true horror. Abby was the most affected. Her small body convulsed with tremors, her face pale as a ghost in the faint moonlight. She hugged herself tightly, her knees threatening to buckle. The psychic assault had been overwhelming. She didn't just hear the voices, she felt the malevolence, an overpowering wave of ancient despair and hunger. Her empathic ability, often her greatest asset, had become her vulnerability. She sobbed softly, tears tracing dusty paths down her cheeks. It's not just Mary," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "It's something older, something that feeds. It's like a void, an emptiness that just wants to take." Jason knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight, comforting hug. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, threatening to burst, but he needed to be strong for them. "We're out. Abby, we're safe." His words rang hollow, even to himself. He knew better. Safety was an illusion, especially after a visit to Waverly. They stayed there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. huddled together against the cold and lingering fear. The sun wouldn't rise for another few hours, but the first hint of false dawn, a faint gray hue on the eastern horizon, offered a thin ray of hope. Finally, Jason stood, gently pulling Abby to her feet. "We need to go," he said, his voice steady, resolute. "To the hotel, we'll debrief there." Their drive back to their downtown Louisville hotel was silent, save for the hum of the SUV engine and Abby's occasional shudders. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, replaying the night's horrors. Jason's mind raced, trying to categorize what he had seen. It defied known paranormal phenomena. It wasn't a shadow person, not a demon as commonly understood. It was an amorphous yet tangible entity, a predatory being that could manipulate physical space and even time, with the distortions they had experienced in the corridors. Its movement on the ceiling spoke of a disregard for natural laws, a primal, unsettling defiance. Daryl, meanwhile, was meticulously reviewing his camera footage on a small, rugged tablet. Every bit of static, every burst of interference was scrutinized. He saw Jason's face, a mask of pure terror, as he stared at something invisible to the lens. He heard Abby's screams, the deafening door slam, and the chilling whispers, but no visual evidence of the entity. It was as if it existed on a different plane, one that only certain frequencies or certain eyes could perceive. His equipment's failure, his trusted tools, was a personal affront, chipping away at his composure. A simmering, unsettling frustration began to boil within him. Abby, curled up in the back seat, kept her eyes squeezed shut. She was trying to protect herself, building psychic walls against the lingering echoes of Waverly. Nurse Mary, a tragic, desperate spirit, but the other presence, that was an entirely different kind of monster. It was ancient, malevolent, and intelligent. It had sensed her. It had known her, and the way it stalked them, manipulating the very fabric of the building, affirmed its terrifying power. She had heard its thoughts, a jumble of hunger and cold possessiveness. "You're mine now," a part of her mind whispered, an echo not her own. She bit her lip, tasting iron, trying to keep herself grounded in the physical world. They arrived at the Brown Hotel just as the city was beginning to stir, a ghostly gray light replacing the deep black of night. The hotel's ornate lobby, with its rich wood paneling and historical grandeur, felt like an abrupt return to normalcy. It was too bright, too quiet, too safe. Their suite on the 7th floor, a spacious room overlooking the waking city, provided little comfort. They immediately began their debriefing. Jason opened his laptop, connecting various audio recorders. Daryl meticulously uploaded his video and audio files. Abby, still pale, sat wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, clutching a steaming mug of coffee, trying to steady her nerves. "All right," Jason began, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline crash. "Let's go over it step by step. Daryl, anything on your cameras? Anything at all?" Daryl shook his head, a grim line on his lips. "Nothing, Jason. Just static and interference when it was there, and when the door slammed. No thermal signatures, no spectral anomalies. It's like it's completely out of phase with our reality, or too subtle for equipment to pick up its physical form." He paused, his gaze distant. "I've never seen anything like it. Never." His frustration was evident, but so was a deeper fear. His tools had failed him, leaving him vulnerable. "Abby," Jason turned to her, his expression gentle. "Tell us what you felt. Everything." Abby took a shaky breath. "First, the footsteps. That wasn't a spirit. That was a manifestation, a physical impact with no physical source. It was testing us. I think, moving around, gauging our reactions." Her eyes darted around the room, as if the shadow might suddenly appear in their suite. Then, when we were near the rooftop door, Jason, you saw it clearly. I just felt an intense cold, like a vacuum, sucking all warmth and light out of the air, and this feeling of wrongness, like a violation of reality. She paused and taking another sip of coffee. Inside room 504, that's where Mary's presence was very strong, her despair, her fear. But then I realized, it wasn't just her despair, it was her death. She was held down, murdered, and they staged it. It was so clear to me, like a flash, and then something else entered the room, something truly malevolent. It overshadowed Mary's spirit. That was the thing on the ceiling, wasn't it? She looked at Jason, pleading for confirmation. Jason nodded slowly. Yes, Abby. That was what I saw. It was crawling on the ceiling. He shivered, despite the warm room. Darker than night, and those limbs. They bent in impossible ways. It was watching me. I felt it. And the voice, Daryl interjected, replaying the audio file. The chilling, faint whisper filled the room. Why did you come? That was the nurse, Abby said, a tear rolling down her cheek. She was trapped, confused. But then, after the door slammed, she shuddered. The other voice, the one on the recording when we got out, that was it. The thing, it was different, deeper, more possessive. It wasn't asking why we were there. It was telling us we shouldn't have been. Jason replayed the final audio recording. Static. Then the low, raspy, but clearly feminine voice. You saw me? All three sat in silence, the words heavy in the air. This went beyond their usual investigations. They had encountered malevolent spirits, poltergeists, even what some called demonic attachments. But this felt like a primal entity, a guardian of despair that had chosen Waverly as its hunting ground. It was distorting the building's geometry. Daryl finally broke the silence, his voice strained. The corridors, they changed. Longer. Windowless. It wasn't just us being disoriented by fear. The footage proves it. The geometry shifted. Jason nodded. That's why I called for immediate evacuation. That's a level of reality manipulation I've only read about in folklore, never witnessed firsthand. That means it's not just a spirit tied to a location. It's sentient, it's powerful, and it's aware. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze distant. It's aware of us. The atmosphere in the room, initially a haven, began to feel less safe. The comforting hum of the city outside seemed to fade, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air pressure within the hotel suite. A faint, acrid smell, like damp earth and something metallic, began to permeate the luxurious hotel room. Abby suddenly gasped, her eyes wide, staring at the ceiling above them. It's here, she whispered, her voice laced with ultimate fear. I can feel it. It followed us. Jason and Daryl instinctively looked up. The pristine white ceiling of the hotel room showed no visual anomalies, no shadows, no distortions. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop, just slightly, causing a prickling sensation on their skin. Daryl's EMF meter, sitting on the coffee table, remained resolutely green. Abby, what do you feel? Jason asked, his voice low, his hand instinctively reaching for his flashlight, though he knew it wouldn't help. It's like a pressure, Abby described, her voice strained. Like a heavy blanket, and it's watching. From the corner of the room, it's not moving, not like in Waverly. It's just there, and it's angry, so angry that we saw it. Her eyes welled with tears. It wants to know why we saw it, why we broke its silence. Daryl stood up, slowly, his large frame stiff. He walked towards the corner of the room that Abby was staring at, his eyes scrutinizing every inch of the ceiling. There's nothing there. Abby, he said, trying to reassure her, but his voice lacked conviction. He felt the cold, too. He felt the weight in the air. As he reached the corner, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound emanated from directly above him. It was very soft, like something lightly scraping plaster, but it immediately sent shivers down all their spines. Daryl flinched, stepping back quickly. "It heard you," Abby whimpered, burying her face in her hands. "It knows we're talking about it." A profound silence settled, heavier than before. The hum of the city outside completely vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness within the hotel suite. The air seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. Jason felt a growing sense of suffocation, as if the walls were closing in, though logically he knew they weren't. Suddenly, a framed painting on the opposite wall, a cheerful landscape, tilted precariously. Then, without warning, it fell, shattering on the floor with a loud crash, sending glass shards and debris scattering across the carpet. All three gasped, hearts pounding. This was physical manifestation. This was direct interaction. "It's getting stronger," Jason muttered, his voice heavy. This was no ordinary haunting confined to its location. This was an entity that had followed them. It was a terrifying escalation. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Waverly had never given up its secrets before, but this time was different. This secret had followed him home. Abby was now openly sobbing, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. "It wants us to know it's here," she cried out. "It wants us to be scared. And it's so cold. Like death." Daryl, despite his fear, took action. He retrieved a handheld digital thermometer. He pointed it at the ceiling where Abby had indicated. The temperature plummeted rapidly. 70 degrees on 65, 60. It kept dropping. Within 30 seconds, it reached 45 Carter, then dropped to 38 Carter. The air conditioning was off. The room was supposed to be a comfortable 72 degrees. A localized cold spot, dropping to near freezing, confirmed the entity's presence. "This isn't residual," Jason said, his voice almost a whisper, confirming the obvious to himself as much as to his team. "This is sentient. This is active." His mind raced, recalling every case file, every piece of lore he had ever read. "It's feeding on our fear. That's why it followed us. It wants to feed on that fear." A chilling thought struck Jason. The entity at Waverly wasn't just lurking, it was hungry. And by seeing it, by acknowledging its existence, they had given it what it craved: attention. And perhaps a way out of its prison. "We need to find out what it is," Jason declared, his scientific mind kicking back in, despite the fear, "and how to get rid of it, because if it followed us here, it's not going to stop." The rest of the day was spent researching. They pored over old texts, historical documents about Waverly Hills, and other cases of deeply entrenched, malevolent entities. They looked for anything recurring symbols, specific rituals associated with the building's history, patterns in the deaths, or any mention of a presence that defied typical spectral classification. They discovered more about the dark practices that occurred in Waverly beyond just the sheer number of tuberculosis deaths. Experimental, often brutal, treatments, lobotomies performed on unwilling patients, allegations of patient abuse, neglect, and even strange rituals performed by some of the staff who had succumbed to madness under the building's oppressive atmosphere. The fifth floor, in particular, where Nurse Mary died, was a hotbed of such dark energy. It was said that the dead there were not merely victims of disease, but victims of the very place itself. The body chute, Daryl read aloud from an online article, pointing to a diagram. This was a tunnel that went from the hospital's ground floor down to the train tracks at the bottom of the hill. It was used to transport the dead so that patients on the upper floors wouldn't see the constant stream of bodies leaving. It was meant to maintain morale, but they say the chute was filled with the echoes of thousands of souls being sent out like refuse. A place designed to hide death, Jason mused. But instead, it became a conduit for it, an artery of despair. He felt a cold clarity settling over him. The entity wasn't just the accumulated pain, it was the embodiment of Waverly's entire brutal history, its secrets, its hidden horrors. They also researched protective measures. Standard ghost hunting gear wouldn't cut it. They needed something more substantial. Salt, iron, certain herbs, religious artifacts, all traditional elements against malevolent spirits. But against a sentient building, Jason wasn't sure. We need a strong focal point, Jason decided. Something that represents life, purity, a counter to its death and decay. He thought of crystals, of certain ancient symbols. And light, not just flashlights. We need powerful, continuous light. They spent the afternoon gathering supplies, industrial-strength floodlights, extra batteries, large bags of rock salt, bundles of dried sage and rosemary, and a heavy iron cross that Daryl found in an antique shop. Though he was hesitant about its effectiveness against something so alien, Abby, with her intuitive sense, suggested bringing personal items of comfort or significance, a small, worn family photo for herself, a lucky coin for Jason, a well-loved wrench for Daryl. It's about grounding ourselves, she explained, reminding us of who we are and what we're fighting for. As evening approached, a heavy rain began to fall, turning the Louisville streets slick and reflective. The sky darkened, mirroring the apprehension in their hearts. The drive back to Waverly Hills was even more unnerving than the previous night. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every tree branch resembled a clawed hand. The air in the SUV felt thick, charged with an invisible tension. They parked further down the road this time, away from the immediate vicinity of the sanatorium, and approached on foot through the driving rain. The wind howled around the old building, a mournful lament that seemed to beckon them inside. Waverly Hills, silhouetted against the stormy sky, looked even more imposing, a Gothic monument of dread. "All right," Jason said, his voice low and steady as they stood before the rusted service door. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and water streamed down his face. "We go in, we find the source, and we send it back to hell." Abby shivered, pulling her thin rain jacket tighter. "It's waiting for us," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and a strange, grim determination. "It knows we're here." As they pushed open the old, creaking door, the interior was colder, darker, and more silent than before. The previous night's escape had angered it, and now Waverly was prepared. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a profound, suffocating void that pressed in on their ears, making their own heartbeats sound deafening. The air was thick with the smell of damp decay, metal, and that distinct, metallic scent that Abby had described, the stench of despair. Jason flicked on his powerful LED floodlight, illuminating the vast, decaying lobby. The beam cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing grotesque shadows cast by fallen debris and broken furniture. The sense of being watched was immediate and palpable, 1,000 unseen eyes scrutinizing their every move. "Stay together," Jason commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, echoing eerily in the cavernous space. He led the way, his flashlight sweeping across the walls, looking for anything out of place. This time, they weren't just exploring, they were hunting. As they began their ascent to the 5th floor, the staircase felt colder, the metal groaning more ominously under their weight. They passed through the lower floors, each one a tableau of decay and silent torment. Phantom coughs seemed to echo from the empty rooms. Distant moans whispered from the shadows. Abby clutched her small family photo, murmuring prayers under her breath. Daryl kept his eyes on his equipment, though he knew its limitations. When they reached the 3rd floor, the air became intensely heavy, almost stifling. The lights on their headlamps flickered, dimming momentarily. Jason's EMF meter screamed, its red lights flashing wildly. An almost constant shriek. Then the faint tap, tap, tap of footsteps began again. This time they were clearer, closer, and distinctly from the floor above them, the 4th floor. But they weren't just walking. They were pacing, erratic, quickening. "It's agitated," Abby whispered, Her voice strained. It knows we're here to fight. It's taunting us. Jason raised his hand, signaling a halt. Daryl, get the sage and the salt ready. Abby, focus on sensing. Where is it? The tapping stopped. A long, drawn-out scrape sound echoed from directly above them. On the fourth-floor ceiling, it was the distinct sound of something large dragging itself across plaster, growing louder, closer. It's above us, Abby gasped, pointing a trembling finger upwards. It's coming down. Jason looked up, his floodlight beam cutting through the gloom. There was no visible anomaly, but the scraping grew more intense, accompanied by faint, almost guttural, snarling sounds, like a starved beast preparing to pounce. The temperature plummeted further, a sharp, icy chill radiating from above. It's not coming down the stairs, Daryl stated, his voice tight. It's coming through the ceiling. A chilling thud reverberated through the staircase, as if something heavy had just landed on the ceiling directly above their heads. Plaster dust rained down on them. Then in a low, guttural growl, full of ancient malice, echoed from the ceiling above. It's right here, Jason breathed, pushing Abby behind him. Get ready! This time, the lights of their headlamps didn't just flicker. They died completely, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. The heavy, damp cold instantly wrapped around them, an inescapable shroud. The growl intensified, a guttural sound that seemed to come from every direction at once, reverberating in their very bones. Abby let out a terrified cry. Daryl cursed under his breath. Jason fumbled for his secondary flashlight, his heart hammering against his ribs. The darkness was absolute, a living thing. He could feel the pressure on his chest, the same oppressive weight Abby had described. Then he heard it, the sound of something heavy, wet, and utterly alien dropping from the ceiling onto the stairwell floor just a few steps below them. A distinct, sickening thud followed by a soft, squelching sound. Silence. The growl had stopped. The air was thick with dread. Jason frantically switched on his secondary flashlight. The beam cut through the inky blackness, revealing the stairs below them. And there it was, not on the ceiling, not a shadow. Standing on the staircase, a few steps below them, was the entity. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, its limbs elongated and twisted, bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was the color of decaying, wet earth, mottled with patches of a sickly gray, like desiccated flesh. Its head was small, almost shrunken, with no discernible features beyond 2 gaping, black holes where its eyes should have been, reflecting no light, only consuming it. Its mouth was a wide, vertical slit, ragged and unmoving, yet radiating a silent scream. But the most horrifying detail, its body was covered in thin, wiry hair, wet and matted, clinging to its twisted form, giving it the appearance of something that had crawled out of a forgotten tomb, covered in grave mold, and it was dripping. A dark, viscous liquid seeped from its body, pooling around its feet on the dusty steps, smelling of decay and something sickly sweet. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a tangible nightmare, rendered in horrifying detail. It raised one long, spindly arm, a skeletal finger pointing directly at Jason. Then the growl returned, deeper, more primal, filling the entire stairwell. It wasn't a sound from a throat. It was a vibration that resonated through the very structure of Waverly Hills, a bellow of rage and ownership. You saw me? The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, echoing off the decaying walls, driving shards of fear deep into their souls. The air in the stairwell turned to ice, thick and suffocating. The creature, now terrifyingly corporeal, stood before them, its elongated form seeming to consume the dim light of Jason's shaky flashlight. Its wet, matted hair, like grave mold clinging to decaying flesh, shivered slightly in the profound cold emanating from it. Those gaping black holes where its eyes should have been were fixed on Jason, a gaze of pure, consuming void. The viscous, dark liquid still seeped from its body, forming small, glistening puddles on the steps. "You saw me." The voice, no longer a growl but a deafening roar, echoed through the stairwell, rattling the very bones of the old building and the investigators themselves. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical assault, a wave of primal rage that slammed into their chests, stealing their breath. Abby let out a terrified sob, clutching Jason's arm. Her small frame trembled violently, her face buried against his back. The raw, malevolent energy radiating from the creature was almost unbearable for her sensitive psyche. She felt its immense power, its ancient fury at being disturbed, and its insatiable hunger. Daryl, despite his shock, was the first to react physically. His large hand instinctively went for the heavy iron cross he carried, pulling it from his bag. He held it up, his knuckles white, his expression grim and resolute, though a sheen of sweat glistened on his bald head. He wasn't a religious man, but at this moment, any perceived protection was better than none. "Stay behind me," Jason commanded, his voice a strained whisper, pushing Abby further back. His heart hammered a desperate rhythm against his ribs, threatening to burst through his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this unimaginable horror, but he knew there was no escape. This thing had followed them, and it wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. His mind, usually sharp and analytical, was battling between scientific observation and primal terror. This wasn't a case, this was a fight for their lives. The creature took a step forward, its movement slow, deliberate, each step punctuated by a sickening squelch as its dripping form made contact with the concrete. The sound was amplified in the oppressive silence, a macabre march, its head tilted, the empty gaze never leaving Jason. The temperature in the stairwell plummeted even further, causing their breath to plume violently. Frost began to form on the old, rusted railings. "It knows," Abby whimpered, her voice muffled against Jason's jacket. "It knows we're trying to send it back. It's furious." Jason raised his secondary flashlight, its beam doing little to illuminate the creature's true terror, merely highlighting the horrifying textures of its decaying form. "What do you want?" Jason demanded, his voice trembling but firm. He knew engaging it directly was dangerous, but he needed a distraction, a moment to think. The creature let out another deep, guttural growl that reverberated through the very structure of Waverly. It raised its other long, spindly arm, its fingers, like skeletal claws, splayed unnaturally. It wasn't pointing at them anymore. It was beckoning. Then, the air around them distorted. The walls of the stairwell seemed to ripple, the concrete twisting like liquid. The darkness intensified, swallowing the edges of Jason's flashlight beam. From the shadows between the twisted limbs of the creature, faint, desperate whispers began to rise, swirling around them like a vortex of tormented souls. "Help! Me! I mean, so cold, so alone. The pain never stops." These were the voices of Waverly's forgotten dead, amplified and twisted by the malevolent entity. They weren't just auditory, they were psychic imprints, slamming into Abby's mind, threatening to overwhelm her. She screamed, a raw, piercing sound that cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "Abby, a focus!" Jason yelled, trying to pierce through the psychic noise. "Block them out. Concentrate on the light. On your strength." Daryl, seeing Abby's distress, acted. He reached into his pack and pulled out a bundle of dried sage, wrapped in a thick cloth. With a quick flick of his lighter, the sage burst into flame, releasing a thick, pungent smoke that instantly began to fill the stairwell. The creature recoiled slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible hiss escaping its vertical mouth. The swirling whispers momentarily faltered. The smoke, thick and acrid, seemed to annoy it, perhaps even cause it pain. Salt, Jason barked. Daryl, spread the salt. Daryl, with surprising speed for his size, ripped open a bag of rock salt and began throwing handfuls of it toward the creature. The coarse crystals hit the creature's body with soft thuds, and where they landed, small, sizzling sounds could be heard, like water hitting a hot surface. The dark, viscous liquid dripping from the creature seemed to evaporate on contact with the salt, leaving behind faint, acrid fumes. The creature let out another roar, this one filled with what sounded like pain and frustration. It raised its spindly arms, not to attack them directly, but to lash out at the walls, clawing at the decaying concrete, leaving deep, black gouges that oozed a similar dark liquid. The entire stairwell shook violently. Dust and debris rained down on them. It's trying to destabilize the structure, Jason realized, understanding the entity's strategy. If it couldn't directly touch them, it would bring the building down around them, trapping them, breaking their will. Abby, though still terrified, found a flicker of strength. She had heard Jason's words, seen Daryl's actions. She closed her eyes, focusing not on the cacophony of despair, but on the small, warm photo she held, a picture of her family, her anchor to the living world. She pushed back against the psychic assault, visualizing a shield of pure, white light around them. The oppressive pressure in the air lessened, if only slightly. It doesn't like purity, Abby gasped, opening her eyes. The sage, the salt, it's like fire to it. It's part of the decay. It can't stand anything that's clean, that's alive. Jason's mind raced. That's it. It's a manifestation of the building's decay, not just its pain, but its literal corruption. This was a revelation. It explained its physical form, its aversion to light and purity, its power over the building itself. The body chute. Jason suddenly remembered, his eyes lighting up. Daryl, you said it was used to transport the dead. It's a conduit of decay, a direct link to the darkness of this place. That's its artery, its weakness. The creature, still roaring and lashing out, seemed to sense their shift in understanding. Its movements became more frantic, its growls more desperate. It was losing control. The air around it rippled violently, and the twisted voices of the dead intensified, a chaotic chorus of anguish and fury. We need to get to the body chute, Jason yelled over the din, pulling Abby forward, pushing past the thrashing limbs of the entity. That's its core connection. We can sever it there. The entity, sensing their intent, lunged. It moved with surprising speed, its long, spindly limbs unfolding, propelling it across the steps. Its intention was clear: to block their path, to prevent them from reaching its vulnerable point. Daryl, still swinging the smoldering sage, threw a handful of salt directly at the creature's face. The entity shrieked, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the air, recoiling momentarily, its faceless head writhing as if in agony. This was their chance. Jason pulled Abby and Daryl down the stairs, scrambling past the momentarily stunned creature. They ran, fueled by terror and a desperate glimmer of hope. The growls and shrieks of the entity echoed behind them, growing fainter as they descended further into the lower levels of Waverly. The stairwell opened onto a long, dimly lit corridor on the ground floor. The air here was even colder, thick with the smell of damp earth and stagnant water. This was the basement level, the hidden depths of the sanatorium. They could hear the sounds of the creature pursuing them from above, its horrifying, squelching footsteps descending the stairs. Which way? Daryl panted, his heavy breathing loud in the silence. Jason scanned the walls frantically, his floodlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. He remembered reading about the chute's location, somewhere in the forgotten bowels of the hospital. Then he saw it, a narrow, almost imperceptible archway, half hidden by crumbling plaster and discarded debris. It looked less like a door and more like a wound in the building's side. Above it, etched faintly into the concrete, was a faded, almost unreadable sign. Morgue access, freight chute. That's it, Jason yelled, pointing. The body chute. They scrambled towards the archway, their hearts pounding in their ears. The sounds of the creature were closer now, just above them, almost on the same floor. The growls were deafening. As they reached the archway, a huge black limb, dripping with the foul, dark liquid, slammed down from the ceiling directly in front of them, blocking their path. Plaster and dust exploded outwards. The creature was here, right behind them, its terrifying form pressing in. "There's no way around," Daryl shouted, trying to hack at the limb with his iron cross, but it bounced off the entity's strange, rubbery skin. Abby, eyes wide with terror, suddenly noticed something. Not on the ceiling, but on the floor, just beneath the dripping limb. A faint, glowing symbol. It was barely visible through the dust and grime, an intricate, almost alien sigil, pulsing with a faint, malevolent red light. "Jason, look," she screamed, pointing. On the floor, that symbol. Jason quickly shone his flashlight down. There it was, a complex, circular design, pulsing faintly. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a diagram, a conduit. That's how it's connected, Jason realized, a chilling insight. That's the anchor. It's not just the building, it's a specific nexus point, a ritualistic binding. Maybe a dark ritual was performed here, at the base of the chute, trapping it and feeding it with all the death that passed through. The creature let out another ear-splitting shriek, its head twisting unnaturally. It sensed their understanding. It lunged forward, its entire form now pressing into the narrow corridor, its wet, matted body scraping against the walls, tearing away chunks of concrete. "We have to break it," Jason yelled. "Abby, concentrate!" Daryl, with the iron cross, hit the symbol. Abby closed her eyes, forcing herself to push through the overwhelming fear. She focused her psychic energy, not on sensing, but on projecting. She imagined pure, concentrated light, a force of life, slamming into the malevolent symbol. Daryl, with a guttural roar, swung the heavy iron cross with all his might, aiming directly at the glowing symbol on the floor. The creature shrieked, its monstrous limb flailing wildly, trying to intercept the attack. The iron cross slammed into the symbol with a deafening crack. A flash of blinding white light erupted from the floor, throwing them all backward. The light was pure, searing, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness that had surrounded them. The creature let out a sound that was not a roar, nor a shriek, but a horrific, drawn-out wail of agony and dissolution. Its form began to contort violently, no longer just twisting its limbs, but its entire body seemed to unravel, like smoke being torn apart by a hurricane. The dark, viscous liquid spraying from it now sizzled and evaporated on contact with the air. The faint, echoing whispers of the dead, which had been a chorus of despair, suddenly rose to a crescendo of chaotic, terrified screams before abruptly fading into nothingness. The ground shook violently, as if Waverly Hills itself was screaming in torment. Dust and debris rained down, the building groaning and creaking ominously. The pure white light from the broken symbol pulsed once more, then slowly began to recede, leaving behind a faint, residual glow. When the dust settled, the creature was gone. Not vanished, not disappeared. It was simply not there. No trace of its horrifying form, no lingering stench, only the fresh scent of ozone from the burst of energy and the lingering dust. The dark, viscous liquid that had pooled on the steps was gone, evaporated without a trace. Silence, a true, profound silence, deeper than any they had felt before in Waverly. The oppressive cold began to dissipate, replaced by the natural chill of the abandoned building. Their headlamps, which had died, flickered back to life, their beams steady and strong. They spent another hour in Waverly, moving slowly through the now quiet, albeit still decaying, corridors. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. The chilling whispers were silent. The distinct feeling of being watched was absent. Waverly Hills still held its secrets, its tragic history, but the malevolent, hungry entity that had plagued it, and them, was no more. The building felt empty, like a shell from which a terrible inhabitant had been forcibly evicted. They emerged from Waverly Hills into the pre-dawn light, drenched from the rain, exhausted but alive. The sky was still gray, but a faint, hopeful sliver of orange was appearing on the horizon. The air, though cold, felt fresh and clean, devoid of the metallic stench of despair. The drive back to the hotel was silent, but it was a silence of profound relief, not dread. Abby, despite her exhaustion, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The psychic weight had been lifted. Daryl stared out the window, his mind clearly reeling from the encounter, but the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet awe. Jason, behind the wheel, looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were tired, but there was a new glint of understanding, of hard-won knowledge. He had faced the darkest corners of the paranormal before, but this was different. This was a confirmation that some entities were not just remnants, but active, predatory forces that could bend reality. And he had survived. 2 weeks later, Jason was back in his apartment in Lexington, attempting to re-establish a sense of normalcy. The events at Waverly Hills had changed them all. Abby was undergoing therapy, slowly coming to terms with the magnitude of what she had experienced and the trauma it had inflicted, but also the profound strength she had found within herself. Daryl had taken a sabbatical, rethinking his approach to paranormal investigation, his trusted equipment now seeming woefully inadequate against the true forces of darkness. Jason himself was wrestling with the aftermath. The image of the creature, its matted hair and empty eyes, haunted his waking thoughts. He had gone through the recordings from that final night, but the audio was mostly static and chaotic shrieks, and the video, as expected, showed nothing of the entity itself. He had kept the very last recording, the one from the night they first saw the entity, the one where the voice had whispered, "You saw me," and later, "Now, I will follow you." He played it back, over and over, late into the night. Each time, the same chilling voice, the same promise. But then, on the 13th playback, something shifted. The voice whispered an additional sentence, clearer this time. "Now, I will follow you, no more." The computer screen flickered once, then died, plunging his study into darkness. His bedroom door creaked open, just slightly. "No win." Jason turned his head slowly, his heart seizing in his chest. On the ceiling, in the darkest corner of his bedroom, nothing. The corner was dark, yes, but empty. The oppressive cold was absent. The feeling of being watched was gone. He waited, his breath held, still nothing. The silence in his apartment was normal, domestic. A sigh of profound relief escaped him. It was truly gone. The anchor was broken, the connection severed. Waverly had finally, truly released its grip. He knew, however, that Waverly Hills would forever hold its sinister allure, its dark past waiting for new investigators, new visitors. But for him and for his team, the chapter of the shadow on the ceiling was closed. They had confronted the monster, faced the abyss, and somehow emerged. But a part of him knew, deep down, that some secrets, once seen, can never truly be forgotten. And in the darkest corners of his memory, the image of the wet, crawling shadow and its empty gaze would forever linger, a chilling reminder of the night he faced the true spirit of Waverly. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Tina Shadow Stories so you don't miss our next chilling tales. See you in the next video.